property manager handed him a notice. Eviction. His name wasn't on a single deed. Not the house, not the cars, not even the company he bragged about to everyone. His wife, the one sleeping in the guest house, had owned all of it, every last thing since day one. The estate sat on the north side of the city, tucked behind iron gates and a long curving driveway lined with magnolia trees. From the outside, it looked like the kind of home that took generations to build. Tall windows, freshly painted white columns, a lawn so green it almost didn't look real. Cars were lined up outside the way they always were when Chinanoa's family came to visit. His mother's old Cadillac, his brother Marcus's truck, a few cousins, a few people Ishi barely recognized anymore. She had spent the morning in the kitchen the way she always did when family gathered, not because anyone asked her to, because she believed in a home that smelled like food, like warmth, like welcome. She had made cornbread from scratch, a pot of greens that had been simmering since dawn, roasted chicken so golden it looked like it came from a painting. She had set the long dining table herself, folded the napkins herself, cut fresh hydrangeas from the garden, and placed them in a vase at the center of the table the way her grandmother once taught her. She had done all of this without being asked. She had done all of this because she still believed even now in the ritual of home. She was carrying a serving dish from the kitchen when the front door opened. Chinanoa walked in with Tiffany on his arm openly, without hesitation, without apology. Tiffany was wearing a sundress as she had never seen before, and she laughed at something Chinanoa whispered in her ear the moment they crossed the threshold. She was loud and comfortable, and she moved through the room, the way a person moves through a space they already own. She walked straight to the long dining table, pulled out the chair at the head, Esha's chair, the chair Esha always sat in, and she sat down. As she stopped it, the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room, she held the serving dish with both hands. She did not move. Marcus, Chinwa's younger brother, was already seated. He looked up, saw the whole thing, and said nothing. He reached for the bread basket instead, picked up a piece of cornbread she had baked, and bit into it without looking at her. Then Chinwa's mother, Ms. Audit, came in from the living room. She was a small, sharp woman with opinions that took up far more space than her body ever did. She looked at Tiffany sitting at the head of the table, and something crossed her face that was not quite a smile, but was not anything close to disapproval either. She clapped her hands together once, the way she did when she was pleased about something, and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Now that is what a real woman looks like at the head of a family table." She did not look at Tiffany when she said it. She looked at Esha. Escher set the serving dish down on the table slowly. Carefully, the way you set down something precious, something you intend to come back for. Chinanoa crossed the room toward her. He lowered his voice, but not enough. In a house full of family, a lowered voice still carries. He said, "I have been meaning to talk to you about the guest house. It's set up now, it's comfortable out there, you'll be just fine." Ishi looked at him. She looked at him the way a person looks at a door they are about to close for the last time. Long, steady, seeing everything. Then she nodded once, just once. She reached for the glass of water sitting at her place setting, picked it up, and walked out of the dining room, through the kitchen, out the side door, across the lawn toward the small white building at the far end of the property. Nobody stopped her. Tiffany leaned back in the chair and laughed at something again. Ms. Audit settled into her own seat with a look of deep satisfaction. Marcus poured himself a glass of wine and scrolled his phone. The family dinner began without the woman who had cooked every dish on that table. And as Etch walked across the lawn in the long golden light of that Sunday afternoon, she was not crying, she was not broken. She was holding the glass of water in one hand, and in the other, pressed against the fabric of her blouse, she was touching something small and warm and metal, a brass key on a worn leather cord. She pressed it between her fingers as she walked, and something in her face, something a stranger would never catch, but a close friend would never forget, shifted into a calm so deep it looked almost like peace. Because Aishi knew something she had always known, and tonight was not the end of anything. Tonight was simply the last page of the first chapter. She stepped into the guest house and closed the door behind her, moved to the small wooden dresser in the corner, opened the bottom drawer. Inside, beneath a folded scarf and a worn leather Bible, sat a thick sealed folder. She looked at it for a moment, ran her fingertips across the edge without opening it. Then she breathed one long, slow breath and closed the drawer again. Not yet, but soon. To understand, you have to go back. You have to go back to red dirt and pine trees and a small porch on the edge of a Mississippi county where nobody had very much, but everybody understood the value of what little they had. You have to go back to a girl with bare feet and a serious face and eyes that were already older than her years. As she was 12 years old the summer her grandmother, Grandma Cleo, sat her down on that porch and began to teach her the real curriculum. Not the one from school, though easy was sharp as a blade in the classroom, but the one that didn't come from any book, the one that only certain women passed down. Grandma Cleo was a broad, quiet woman who had survived things she never fully named out loud. She had raised 3 children on a teacher's salary after her husband went home to the Lord too early. She had bought land when people told her she couldn't. She had built a little savings when people told her she had nothing to save. And she had done all of it without making a single announcement, without asking a single permission, and without letting a single person see her hand until she was ready. She sat in her rocking chair that summer evening, counting coins into a tin jar the way she did every week. And she said to young Esha, "Baby, the most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody thinks is watching." As she didn't understand it fully, then she filed it away the way children file away things that feel important without yet knowing why. She watched Grandma Cleo over the years that followed, She watched how the old woman moved through the world, quiet but unignorable, gentle but immovable. She watched how Grandma Cleo never argued with people who underestimated her. She simply let them underestimate her, and then she let the results speak. She watched how the old woman could sit across from a man twice her size who was talking loud and wrong about something. And she would just nod and smile and say, "Is that right?" And 2 months later that same man would be coming to Grandma Cleo asking for advice about the exact thing he had been so wrong about, and she would give it to him graciously. Because she did not need to win the argument to win the outcome. That distinction took easy years to fully understand, but once she understood it, she never forgot it. There was a woman in their county, a neighbor named Mrs. Francis, who had lost everything she owned in a bad business deal when Easy was about 14. Mrs. Francis had signed papers she didn't fully read, trusted a man who seemed trustworthy, and woke up one morning to find the ground had shifted beneath her. As she watched what that loss did to a woman, she watched the way it didn't just take the money. It took something else, some inner assurance, some certainty about her own judgment that Mrs. Francis spent years trying to get back. As she filed that image away in the part of her mind where she kept the things that shaped her, she told herself at 14 years old on a Mississippi porch that she would never sign anything she did not fully understand. She would never let her name be on a document whose depth she had not personally measured. She would never give another person the ability to pull a floor out from under her. As she carried that lesson with her to college on a full academic scholarship, one she earned while cousins doubted she would even graduate high school. She carried it through a law degree that nearly broke her and then made her. She carried it through a second degree in real estate finance that turned everything she had learned about value and ownership and power into a language she spoke fluently, quietly, and alone. Her mother had worked 2 jobs most of Esh's childhood: mornings at the hospital, evenings at the beauty supply store on the main road. She came home tired every night and still managed to smile. Essie never forgot that smile, never forgot what it cost, never forgot that she was going to build something so solid, so deep-rooted, so legally protected that no one, not a man, not a market, not a moment of bad fortune would ever be able to take it from her the way life had taken so much from the women before her. Before she left for college, Grandma Cleo called her to the porch one last time. She reached into the pocket of her house dress and pulled out a small brass key on a worn leather cord. The key was old and smooth, and the kind of warm that metal gets when it has been held for a very long time. Cleo pressed it into Isha's palm and said, "This key doesn't open anything yet. But one day everything you build will need a key. Keep it close and don't ever let them see it coming." Essie put it around her neck that same day. She had not taken it off since not when she founded LCB Group, the holding company she built from a studio apartment and a second-hand laptop, and a set of real estate licenses that cost her every dollar she had at 24 years old. Not when the company grew into something that stretched across 7 states and $40 billion in assets across hotels, commercial real estate, development land, and investment portfolios. Not when she met Chinua at a charity event 8 years ago and fell for his confidence and his laughter and the way he looked at her like she was the most extraordinary thing in the room. Not once. The brass key had been under her collar at their wedding. It had been under her collar through 5 years of marriage. It had been under her collar. On the Sunday he walked Tiffany through the front door of a home that had always belonged to Easy. Back in the guest house now, she sat on the edge of the bed. She held the key in her palm the way Grandma Cleo used to hold it. She closed her eyes, and for just a moment she was 12 years old again on that porch in Mississippi, and the evening was warm and someone who loved her was telling her the truth about the world. She opened her eyes. The guest house was comfortable. She had designed it herself. She almost smiled at that. The weeks that followed were weeks of small cruelties, the kind that accumulate the way water damage does, quietly and visibly until the walls give. Tiffany moved deeper into the main house with every passing day. She redecorated the master bedroom first, took down the framed photographs of Etch and Chinua's early years together and replaced them with prints she ordered online. She had the living room furniture rearranged. She threw away things without asking. Things that were Etch's, things that had names and histories and meaning. She did it cheerfully, the way people do things when they believe they're building rather than destroying. Chinua watched all of it and said nothing. Marcus came over twice a week now. He and Chinua spent long evenings at the dining room table, the same table Easy had set with hydrangeas, going over papers that Tiffany slid in front of them: business documents, account transfer forms, investment authorization papers. They signed without reading closely. Neither of them had ever been very careful with fine print. Neither of them understood that the company they believed Chinua ran, the one he introduced himself with at parties, the one he referenced in every conversation about his success, was a subsidiary that had always operated under the LCB Group's silent authorization. His name on the letterhead had always been exactly what Aishi had designed it to be: a front, a courtesy, a title with no foundation underneath it. The transfers they were signing meant nothing. Every asset had been structured across multiple holding entities, layered and protected by a legal architecture that Easy had spent years building with a team of the sharpest attorneys in the Southeast. Tiffany's people had found the surface accounts. They had not found the depth. Ms. Audit worked the family. She called cousins. She had conversations at church. She said she had always been troubled. Said Chinua had sacrificed years trying to carry a woman who couldn't meet him at his level. Said Tiffany was the kind of woman he deserved. Warm, supportive, present. The narrative moved through the family like smoke through a cracked window. Quiet enough that nobody could point to it, thick enough that it changed everything. One Thursday morning, a cousin named Deshan approached Easy at the grocery store. He was genuinely kind, Deshan, and his face held the specific discomfort of someone delivering bad news they didn't ask to carry. He touched her elbow and said, "Lo, Easy, people are talking. They're saying you out there in that guest house like you lost something, like you got nothing left. Why don't you just go start fresh somewhere?" As she looked at him for a moment, she considered him. Then she said gently and without any edge at all, "I'm exactly where I need to be, Deshan." He searched her face for the distress he expected to find. He found nothing that looked like distress. He walked away confused. What Deshan could not have known, what none of them could have known, was that Esh's stillness was not the stillness of a woman defeated. It was something else entirely. There is a certain kind of person who has built something so solid, so deep, so quietly reinforced over so many years that when someone tries to take it from them, the attempt does not feel like destruction. It feels almost like entertainment, like watching someone walk up to a mountain and push it with their hands. She had spent 14 years building walls they could not see. She was not afraid of any of them. She was simply waiting the way. Woman waits who has already decided how the story ends. The breaking point came on a Friday evening in the third week. Chino was hosting a dinner party for business associates, city officials, a developer from out of town he had been trying to impress for months. Tiffany wore a gown, candles on every surface. The house looked beautiful in a way that was a direct imitation of how Easy had always kept it. Easy was not invited. She sat in the guest house with a book she was not reading, watching the warm light pour from the windows of the main house across the dark lawn. She could hear faint music, low laughter, the sound of a party in a house she had built from nothing. Around 9:00, Chinua stepped outside to take a phone call. He stood on the back patio. He did not see Esha sitting in the darkness of the guest house porch. He did not know she could hear him. His voice carried across the quiet yard and every word arrived at her ears clean and clear. He said into the phone, Yeah, she's still out they're in the guest house. Look, she got nothing, man. She never had anything. Whatever she thought she brought to this, it was me. It was always me. I made that woman." A silence on his end while the other person responded. Then Chinoa laughed low and easy. The laugh of a man who has convinced himself completely as she sat in the dark and felt something tighten in her jaw. One tear formed in the corner of her right eye. She did not let it fall. She pressed the heel of her hand to her cheek, held it there for 3 full seconds, and then she took it away and the tear was gone. She stood up. She went inside the guest house. She went to the dresser. She opened the bottom drawer. She moved aside the scarf and the Bible and she took out the thick sealed folder. She sat at the small desk in the corner, a desk she had chosen because it had good light and faced east, and she opened the folder. Pages and pages, property deeds, holding company registrations, LLC structures and trust documents and investment portfolio statements, real estate development agreements across Atlanta, Houston, Memphis, Charlotte, Birmingham, New Orleans, and Nashville. Hotel acquisitions, commercial land banks. The kind of wealth that does not announce itself at dinner parties. The kind that simply exists day after day, quietly compounding, protected behind legal walls that would take a team of 40 lawyers in 2 years to even begin to untangle. $40 billion. Every document bearing one name, hers. She looked at the pages for a long time, then she reached for her phone and made one call. She said, "Warren, it's time." She heard the smile in his voice when he said, "I'll have everything ready." She closed the folder. She set it on the desk. She looked at the guest house walls she had designed in a space she had built on land she had purchased long before Chinua ever proposed to her. And something settled in her chest that felt like the closing of a door, not a painful closing, a final one. That was the night stopped grieving and started finishing. The gala was held on a Saturday night in late October downtown Atlanta in a glass and steel event center that occupied an entire city block. Every light in that building was on. Every important name in Atlanta real estate was on the guest list. City council members, developers, investors, the kind of room where business gets done not in board meetings but in the spaces between handshakes. The event was hosted by a real estate development consortium. One of those groups whose name appears on building signage and development permits and city planning documents across the metro area. The kind of group that shapes skylines. What the general public did not know, what Chinua certainly did not know, was that the consortium's primary financial backer, the silent architect behind its most significant projects over the past decade, was the LCB Group. Chinua had received his invitation through a connection Marcus had made. He arrived in a rented tuxedo that was a half size too large in the shoulder. He had Tiffany on his arm, who wore something gold, and moved through the lobby with the confidence of someone who had earned their place there. He worked the room the way he always had, loud handshake, big smile, the name of his company on his lips before the second sentence. He was in his element. He was performing. At 9:15, the double doors at the far end of the room opened. The first thing people noticed was the stillness she moved through, not because the room went quiet. The room did not go quiet immediately, but because she had the kind of presence that creates its own. Whether she wore a deep burgundy gown floor length, the kind of deep red that in certain lighting looks almost like authorita-made fabric. Her hair was natural and full, the way she wore it when she was not trying to be anything other than exactly what she was. The brass key hung visibly against her collarbone, no longer hidden under a collar, no longer tucked away, polished and placed deliberately at the center of her neckline like a period at the end of a long, patient sentence. Warren, the consortium's head and one of the most respected figures in Southern real estate development, was across the room when she entered. He stopped his conversation mid-sentence. He crossed the floor directly to her. He took both her hands in the way you take the hands of someone you genuinely admire, and he said loud, clear, and carrying, "Ms. Esha, welcome. Everything is ready for your announcement." Several heads turned. Chinua, who had been shaking hands with a city council member 30 ft away, heard the words. He turned. He saw Esha across the room. He saw Warren's posture differential warm, the posture of a man addressing someone above him. He saw the room begin to orient toward her, the way a room orients towards someone it recognizes as significant. Something moved across Chinanoa's face, uncertainty, the first crack in a very confident performance. Tiffany tightened her hand on his arm. She felt the shift too. She felt it, but she did not yet understand it. Warren walked Esha to the podium at the front of the room. She stood behind it without holding the sides, the way people stand when they do not need anything to hold on to. She waited for the room to settle. It settled quickly. These were people who knew how to read a moment. She did not begin with pleasantries. She did not thank anyone for the invitation. She said clearly and without performance, "My name is Asa. I am the sole founder and owner of the LCB Group." She paused, let the name land, watched the recognition move across the room from person to person like a wave. Over the past 14 years, she continued, LCB has developed or acquired assets across 7 states with a current portfolio value of approximately $40 billion. Many of you have done business with us without knowing my name. That was intentional. Tonight I would like that to change. The room was completely still. I also want to address something more personal. Her voice did not change. Not harder, not softer, steady the way deep water is steady. Over the past several weeks, there have been attempts to transfer assets connected to LCB subsidiaries. Those transfers were initiated using authorization that was not legally valid. My attorneys have already filed the appropriate protections. The attempts have been reversed. If anyone in this room received those transfer documents, please know they are null. My legal team will be reaching out directly. She did not look at Chinanoa while she said any of this. She looked at the room. She spoke to the room the way someone speaks when they are not making a scene, but are simply closing a matter of business that needed to be closed. Then she looked at Chinua just once, just for a moment. She did not look at him with anger. Anger would have required her to care what he thought of her. She looked at him with something quieter, something that if he was honest with himself in the years that followed, he would have to call what it actually was. Pity. She stepped away from the podium. Warren handed her a glass of water. She took it. She turned her back on Chinano. Bullion did not turn around again. Tiffany stood with her champagne glass frozen in her hand, raised halfway to lips that had stopped moving. Marcus, somewhere in the back of the room, felt his phone begin to vibrate in his pocket over and over, messages coming in from people who had seen the live stream. One of the event attendees had opened to social media. Ms. Audit was at home. She had been watching a cooking program. A cousin called her, told her to get to her phone, told her to find stream. She found it just in time to hear the tail end of Esha's words at the podium. The phone stayed at her ear long after the call ended. Chinanoa stood in the middle of the most important room in Atlanta real estate and felt the floor of the identity he had built begin to separate from anything solid underneath it. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. $40 billion had already said everything. 72 hours. That was how long it took for everything Chinua had been standing on to reveal itself as air. The accounts he thought he controlled, the ones Tiffany's people had been maneuvering documents toward for weeks, were frozen and reversed before the weekend was out. The process was clean and fast because Ishii's attorneys had been prepared for it. They had been watching it happen in real time. They had simply been waiting for the right moment to close the trap. The cars, both of them, the black SUV and the silver sedan that Chinua drove to every meeting and every dinner and every social occasion where he needed to look like a man of substance, were registered under an LCB Group subsidiary. They were repossessed on Monday morning. A tow truck arrived at the estate while Chinua was still inside. A neighbor saw it, then another. By Monday afternoon, 6 people had mentioned it to other people. The estate itself, the white columned house on the Magnolia Line driveway, the house Chinua had been calling his for years, the house he had given Tiffany the run of, the house where he had walked Ishii out to the guest house in front of his mother and his brother, and not one person had said stop. Turned out to have never had his name on a single document. It had been purchased by Isha 3 years before they married. It had been transferred into an LCB trust 2 years after the wedding. When the property manager arrived that Tuesday with the eviction notice, Chinua read it 3 times. Then he read it a 4th time. Then he set it on the kitchen counter, Tiffany's new kitchen counter with the backsplash Tiffany had chosen. And he sat down in a chair and he did not get up for a very long time. Tiffany understood immediately what the eviction notice meant, not just for Chinua but for her own position in this story. She had placed herself beside a man because of what she believed he had. She had moved into a house because of what she believed he owned. She had convinced herself that Easy was a woman with nothing, a wife who had been carried, a woman who did not deserve the life she had been living. She had built her entire understanding of the situation on a foundation that had never existed. She packed her things over 2 days. She did not cry, she was too practical for that. She called 2 people she thought might be able to help her negotiate some kind of access, some kind of arrangement. Through a mutual contact, she managed to get a message to Esha's office, a personal appeal explaining, apologizing, asking for a conversation. Easy's assistant, a young woman named Porsche, who had worked for LCB for 4 years and who was completely devoted to her employer, sent back a response in 3 words: she is unavailable permanently. Tiffany left Atlanta before the month was out. Nobody in Chinanua's circle ever mentioned her name again after that. She simply became an absence where a presence used to be. Marcus lost the business deal he had been developing for 2 years. It was a commercial real estate project in Midtown, mixed-use residential and retail that he had pitched to an investment fund through a connection he'd made the previous year. What Marcus did not know, had never thought to ask, was that the fund's lead capital source was an LCB portfolio account. When the account was reorganized following the events of the gala weekend, the fund's commitment to Marcus' project was quietly withdrawn. No explanation, no drama, just a brief letter that said the fund's direction had changed. Marcus called the contact number 3 times. Nobody answered. Ms. Audit received a certified letter at the family home she had been living in. Home Chinanua had assured her was paid off and secure under his name, informing her that the property was held under LCB Group and would be listed for sale within 90 days. She called Chinua screaming. His phone rang 8 times and went to voicemail. She called Marcus. Marcus told her he couldn't talk right now. She sat in the house she had hosted family dinners in for 12 years, and she looked at the walls and she thought about the Sunday she had looked at Asia in that dining room and said what a real woman looks like. And for the first time in a very long time, Ms. Audit felt something she was not accustomed to feeling. Small. Chinua ended up in a rented apartment in a part of the city he had previously looked down on. The company whose name he had been using, the subsidiaries, the letterhead, the title, had been reorganized under a new management structure. His role, such as it had been, ceased to exist. He applied for 2 positions over the following months, using the professional reputation he had cultivated under ESH's infrastructure. Both applications stalled when the background of the company behind his resume was examined more closely. He called Esha once. She did not answer. He sent a message once. She did not reply. He sat in the rented apartment and looked at the ceiling. And finally, for the first time in their entire marriage, he began the long and uncomfortable process of understanding who Ashi had actually been. He thought back over 8 years, the way she was always calm, the way she always knew things he didn't. No, she knew, the way she never boasted about money or holdings or deals the way he did. The way she wore that brass key every single day like a quiet reminder to herself that she had never needed him. He had called her simple. He had called her without ambition. He had told someone on the phone on his own back patio in the dark, believing he was alone, that he had made her. He pressed his eyes closed in the rented apartment and that sentence came back to him. He had made her. He turned it over, looked at it from every angle, felt the full weight of how wrong a man can be about a woman he shared a home and a name and a life with. He had not made her. She had arrived already made. Long before he ever walked into that charity event and smiled at her across the room. She had been made in Mississippi on a porch by a grandmother with a tin jar and a brass key, and more wisdom in her quiet hands than Chinua had managed to find in an entire lifetime of being loud about it. They had all laughed at the woman in the guest house, they had posted about it on group chats and felt satisfied. They had called her diminished. What none of them had ever been curious enough to wonder was what the view looked like from the guest house, what she might have been looking at through that window all those quiet nights, what she might have been planning while they drank the wine and ate the food she had cooked and arranged their lives on top of her foundation. The guest house had always had a better view than the main house ever did. She had chosen it herself. 6 months later, as she drove 14 hours from Atlanta to a stretch of county road in Mississippi she had not driven in almost 4 years. She drove alone, she did not call ahead, the land knew her, that was enough. The old property had been empty since Grandma Cleo passed. She had kept the taxes paid, the deed in order, the grass cut by a local man she paid twice a year. She had been waiting until she was ready, until she had something whole to bring back to a place that had given her everything important she had ever carried. She had learned long ago that there is a difference between going home because you have nowhere else to go, and going home because you have become the person you needed to be to deserve it. She had not been ready to come back until now, until the thing she had been quietly building was no longer something she had to hide, until she could walk up that dirt road as the full visible, unbothered version of herself, without anyone in the world having a claim on what she was or wasn't. She had bought back the surrounding land over the years, quietly through an LCB subsidiary without fanfare. The creek at the back of the old property that used to flood and damage the lower fields was redirected with proper grading. The porch had been restored in the fall, while everything else in her life was still collapsing from the outside. She had commissioned the work without even seeing it yet. Trusting the plans she had drawn up with a contractor she trusted, she pulled up the long dirt road and stepped out of the car into the kind of quiet that cities only dream about. Pine trees, red dirt, the smell of earth after rain. The sky was enormous out here the way it is, only in places where buildings don't interrupt it. She stood beside the car for a moment and just breathed, took it all in, let the quiet settle on her shoulders, the way it used to when she was a girl and this land was the whole world she knew. The porch was exactly as she had asked for it, wide, painted the same pale gray it had been when she was a child, with the same rocking chair sourced from an antique dealer in Jackson because the original had finally given up after all those years. She sat in the rocking chair. After a while, her sister's daughter came running across the yard toward her. The girl was 12 years old, all legs and curiosity, and a face that reminded Easy of herself at that age, in a way that was almost difficult to look at directly. She ran up the porch steps and stood in front of Esha, slightly out of breath, pointing at the brass key hanging against Esha's collarbone. "Auntie Isha," she said, "what is that key for?" As she looked at it, she had been looking at it differently since the gala, not with the weight of what it had been through, but with something lighter, something closer to gratitude. She looked at her niece's serious young face and she felt Grandma Cleo so close it was like she was standing just behind the rocking chair. She said, "Everything, baby, everything I ever needed." She closed her fingers around the key. The evening came in from the east, warm and slow, the way evenings come in Mississippi when there is nowhere to be and nothing left to prove. Somewhere in Atlanta, a man was learning what it meant to stand on ground that was never his. Somewhere else, an old woman was sitting in a house that had never really been her son's. And somewhere, a young woman who had worked her whole life in quiet was rocking on a porch her grandmother used to rock on, holding a key to everything she had built, listening to the pine trees and finally, feeling the full weight of what it means to have been right all along. She had not raised her voice, not once. She had not made a scene. She had not begged for a seat at a table she had purchased with her own money and set with her own hands. She had not chased them, confronted them in grocery stores, called cousins to spread her own version of the story, shown up at doors demanding explanations. She had given none of them the pleasure of watching her come apart because she understood. And this was the thing Grandma Cleo had spent years trying to teach, the thing that took the longest to really live in. She understood that dignity is not something other people give you permission to have. It is something you protect from the inside, something you carry so deep inside yourself that no one can reach it no matter what they do to the outside. She had understood something that the loud ones, the greedy ones, the careless ones, the people who mistake noise for power and chaos for control, she had understood something that none of them would ever fully grasp. Real power does not announce itself. It does not need to, it builds, it waits. It structures and protects and compounds in silence year after year behind walls that the uncareful never think to look for. And when it finally decides to speak, not with anger, not with bitterness, not with any of the performances people expect from someone who has been wronged. When it speaks simply by standing up and saying its own name in a room full of people who suddenly understand what that name means, there is nothing left to say, nothing at all. See you in the next.